Hey everybody, welcome to the 36 Charge Podcast.
Hello, everyone.
And tonight's episode is episode 19 about prepping for tournament. We host the podcast live every Wednesday night at TV.
I hear you.
My mic's not working. Oh, there we go. All right, so my mic is working. All right, so welcome to the 36 Charge Podcast. My name is Svo. Tonight's episode is episode 19, prepping for tournament. And joining me tonight is Benjamin Rubenstein.
Hello, everyone.
All right, so let's talk about prepping for tournaments because, granted, like not too many in-person events going on right now, but there are still events going on. I know out in Ohio. I know in Ohio, a friend of mine just went to an RTT. Events are still happening. What is it that we do to prepare ourselves for tournaments? And I'm talking anywhere from how do you examine the meta of community of where tournaments go. With that said, Benjamin, where do you think you want tonight?
I think the first thing is important to note is like not all tournaments are the same. It's very different prepping for like an RTT that's down the road or like an hour away from your house, and it is like driving like to another state or flying to another state to play in like a GT. So like when I'm prepping for like a weekend RTT, it looks very different from like getting ready to drive down to Washington D.C. to play in Nova. So I think it's sort of important to keep in mind that like those two things are just very different by their nature. And because you're looking to get different things out of those experiences too. Sometimes you're not looking to get the same thing out of Nova as well. I mean, hopefully you're not looking to get the same thing out of Nova as you are out of an RTT. They're so different.
Yeah, I mean, that being said, like if you go to Nova to have a good time and just 8 or 9 games in over again, it's fine. Like having fun.
Yeah,
we're just saying that there's going to be, or I don't want to say cutthroat attitude, but the competition is definitely going to differ. At like a 3-round thing at your RTT.
yeah, and I think the biggest difference is probably where it's worth starting is the meta. When you're playing in local tournaments, you're gonna kind of get used to your regulars. You're gonna know, all right, like these are the people that show up. If I'm going to a tournament where Chris is going, I have to beat a Great White Scars list, piloted by a good player. That's actually true multiple times because there's multiple skilled White Scars, like very cutthroat White Scars players in my area. So that's just a list I need to be able to beat. If I go to a tournament, I'm going to play against White Scars at least once. If I want to win the tournament, I'm definitely going to have to be able to beat White Scars. And that's just, something that I need to, prepare mentally. So I should really know what that book does back to front. My army, I should have at least one like practice games with my army against that list. This is, of course, if I'm looking to try to win that event. Sometimes, I don't necessarily have easy access to White Scars players. So I'll have a list. I'm like, I have not played this against White Scars. But before I go bring it to something huge like a GT, I'd definitely like to get playing against White Scars as an experience. So, and sometimes I might go into tournament less prepared against a certain matchup because, that's sort of my testing ground.
Yeah, I mean, getting that kind of like hands-on practice is. You don't have access that aren't prep work. It helps if you talk to somebody who is competent with that army, is very good with that army, just so that you can get that, maybe not that experience, but you can get that competitive insight from other players.
Mhm. Yeah, so I think the big thing is just like be aware of the meta. Like, what is the meta gonna look like? Just because orcs might be completely busted in like the global meta. If there's 0 orcs players who live in your area, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you don't have to prep to beat whatever nonsense thing that the orc lists are doing because that's just not what you're gonna see.
Yeah. So understanding your local meta is one thing, and that really just comes into knowing your local community. You know, um, let's face it, like Warhammer is a pretty niche thing. So if you're frequenting your local game store, and you've been to maybe an event or two there, you know that you know Benjamin's going to bring Tau, or uh,
I'm a bad person.
Tom is going to bring his bloodthirster that's never going to make his charge because he hasn't made a charge like it for 4 tournaments. Um, or that like Kevin's going to bring Death Watch if it's a viable army. So knowing,
Or if it's not,
or if it's not, um, but knowing that who you're playing against, that's more the local meta than your overall global meta. When we're talking about global meta, we're talking about, hey, you know what's busted right now? Eradicators. Everybody should take fucking 90 of them. That's sort of the global meta thing where everybody kind of just dogpiles onto what might be undercosted this go around of chapter approved.
yeah.
Whereas, yeah, everyone knows that eradicators are undercosted and busted right now. But if not a lot of people in your area play Space Marines, if you know that like there's like a dozen orc players, you don't have to worry about eradicators. You can probably bring a vehicle or two and not worry about it getting blown off the table turn one. You know,
Space Marines is probably not the best example because
Mm.
everyone owns a Space Marine army.
Yeah.
But yeah, that sort of thing stands. Like, sometimes it's just like your local meta can look substantially different from your global meta.
Yeah, but it is important to also
Especially with those.
understand the global meta too, because the global meta is going to inform what your local meta might start trending towards. Like
Yeah,
people at the very top, people like Richard Siegler, Nick Nanavati, Don Husin, um, they have the resources and the network to whatever is like the list or whatever pieces they may need to really bring their list like fully optimized. They have access to people who might be able to lend them some models to get it done, or get some things commission painted, or they've just been playing for long enough where they just have those models.
mhm.
Whereas when you go down to your local level, like Indominus came out like 2 months ago and it's been sold out, and you can't get eradicators unless you're going on eBay to get them from art sellers, and then it takes time to build them, it takes time to paint them. Like I have 6 eradicators and like they're not even painted right now, but if I needed to go to a tournament and they needed to be painted, well, I could probably do it. But if I wanted to bring, what's the max, 18 eradicators?
Yeah, you can bring up to, well, unless you're playing Death Watch, then there is no maximum.
Right. But or a standard Space Marine chapter. If I wanted to bring
Yeah,
18
yeah, it's
eradicators,
18.
it's gonna cost me a lot of money to just buy the eradicators, and it's gonna take me a lot of
Personally,
time
actually.
or money to get them painted. So what I'm saying is the local meta is generally speaking going to lag behind the overarching meta, but over time, like that local meta is going to trend towards whatever it is that the global meta is. So
Yeah.
while the local meta is a lot more about understanding who you're going up against, what kind of matchups you're looking for, you still got to keep an eye on the global meta, just because, well, might be one guy who does have those 18 eradicators.
Yeah, you also want to be aware of like your players who are very dedicated to a faction. So throughout most of 8th edition, I played basically Thousand Suns or Tau in tournaments. I played other things outside of tournaments, but in tournaments, I was showing up with like some sort of Thousand Suns demon amalgamation or Tau, and my Tau lists tended to feature pretty heavily into broadsides, and I was very successful with those Tau lists. So like you knew that like me, I was going to show up with like some random Tau list with a bunch of broadsides in it. Um, which was not like the normal meta, the normal but like if you played around here, like that's what you're gonna go against. That towards the end of 8th, I saw towards the Riptides because base range just forced you to play the best thing, which was unfortunate. But like And be aware, like, if you have like some Eldar player who's like extremely good and he, likes, I don't know, like Shining Spears, even if they're not like the best thing in the meta, like players who are very good with things will make them outperform, the things that they're not as comfortable with. So it's just being aware of like those oddball lists that are kind of like, who do you like, if you faction loyalists who are very good, you'll know who they are. Like in your meta, like you'll just like you're thinking of a person right now, like, oh yeah, Bobby, who always brings, like, I don't know, like 20 mega knobs, like whatever, like those are the sorts of things that are just like, all right, like this is the list. It's just like this weird list that always shows up. And like sometimes the weird list is just too weird and it's not good enough that you need to worry about it a bunch to like try to win the tournament. Um, Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's very good and you like it's just like a weird target that you have to be prepared to deal with.
Yeah, like my example of, like Billy with the bloodthirster that never makes his charge. You got to prepare for that eventuality that like one of these tournaments he might actually make that charge. And it's probably gonna suck for you if he makes that charge. But in the meantime, like that there's gonna be a bloodthirster there if Billy is on the event list. But let's segue into, like, let's say you're on BCP, you've registered for the event and list submissions are closed. Everybody's got their list in, and then a few days before the event, list viewing gets unlocked. What is the first thing that you do? I mean, I know I personally, like, I start looking at just the general like rosters of everybody and just try to see like, all right, well, we've got like 90% Space Marines, like what's my game plan for that? Or looking for like oddball things um like say Necrons before their new codex, like if I saw a Necron player there, I was like, all right, is this an actual like Necron list I need to be worried about? Is it triple croissant, triple doomsday arc, or is it something that's like, I don't know, like a warrior spam that's not going to do anything, and I don't really have to worry about it aside from trying to figure out if I have enough DACA to actually chew through it.
Yeah.
So what's your approach to those first viewing those lists?
Yeah, this is the first place where like my approach for like a GT and a RTT are very different. So if it's something like Nova where there were like 400 players, like I'm not looking at those lists. It's just there's so
No,
much data there.
that's
Like you can play against
impossible.
anyone. Who
No.
knows? Like whatever. I'll play against what I show up against.
Yeah, say it's just like
Uh,
a just below like a major, like I don't know, like 50 players at a GT, or even just like a, I don't know, like a 12 player
so
RTT.
if it's local, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the lists of the 7 or 8 people who I consider to be like the biggest threats to winning the tournament. If my goal is to be winning the event, and if I'm going to a GT, I'm probably aiming to win. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna pull up like the 7 or 8 people, like that are I think like the biggest threats. See if there's anything wacky going on with their lists, or if they're just playing like things that they've been playing before, or like meta choices that aren't surprising that I know about. If it's anything that's like why is Chris playing 4 land speeder storms with scouts in them? What does he know? Anything like weird like that shows up in those lists. Those are definitely the first things I try to check out.
Actually,
At this
funnily
point, I
enough,
basically
at Captain Con, I did go up against the White Scars list that had a bunch of land speeder storms.
that sounds kind of wild. um, so yeah, I like I just familiarize myself with anything weird that's like, all right, I can't for the life of me figure out why there's like a bunch of scouts with rocket launchers inside of these land speeder storms. Like, all right, I open up the Space Marine Codex, read the stratagems again. What am I missing? Like, Chris is a good player. He's not just like doing something ridiculous. Maybe he is. That particular example is like actually ridiculous, but so yeah, so that's usually where I start. It's like look at the players who I think are the biggest set to win. Make sure they're not doing anything off the walls that I'm not going to be prepared for.
Yeah, and if they are doing something off the walls, reviewing that codex, reviewing those stratagems, maybe looking to see if there have been any other like GT results where somebody did do well with something similar, somebody who brought like those land speeder storms, scouts, and trying to figure out like what's the game plan here, because the last thing that you want when you're last round top table is to be surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that for these days, I think you're going to see a lot of off the wall Space Marines and Necron lists where perhaps there's nothing in the list that's like you don't know about, but it's just gonna be just weird combinations because both books are brand new. Both books are very powerful. There's very few weak options in either book. A lot of the weaker options got brought up. Um, so you're just gonna see lots of things in weird combinations, and you're just gonna have to really rack your brain of like, what does this do? Like, what is this like squad of tactical marines doing? Was it just like shaving points? No, there's 8 guys in it. There's a las cannon. Like, I don't know. Like, there's just lots of weird combinations that you don't want to get caught off guard by something that you're just like, oh, I just don't have an answer to that. Like Scorpion Destroyers being -1 to wound and toughness 5. You're like, oh, my option for anti infantry was I have 500 strength 4 shots. It's like, well, you're wounding on 6s, so that's a bad plan, and you've probably lost. Um, yeah, so just things like that.
Yeah. So along the same lines, like the armies that are overall doing well, like you're probably going to be familiar with their capabilities, what their stratagems can do, and the kind of things to be looking out for. Like for example, um, what I'm trying to get at is you don't want to be caught off guard. Like you don't want to go against custodies without realizing that they can charge in your charge phase. You know,
Yep, that's a disaster.
yeah. So like, while on one hand, like I know like a lot of people don't want to play Gotcha 40k, and it's not sporting, it's not fun. There are people that are going to do that to you if you're, you know,
Yeah, you
you're
have to
not-
ask questions, which is the
you
next thing
you can ask questions. So if you get to the table and you're going up against an army that does something have off the wall, you know, you might want to ask, hey, like, what are the funky things that your army can do? Like, what can they do? Anything out of phase, or can they like move 12 inches, consolidate, or if you're not
Yeah,
familiar, always ask. Um, but you also got to keep in mind that it's not on the other player. It's not on the other player to tell you exactly what his army is capable of
yeah.
doing.
There's something like gene stealer cults where like you can ask them about all their stratagems, and you'll have to read every single one in the book because every single one's a trick that will just gotcha you if you don't know about it. And then like you have to remember them all. And if the first time you're hearing about them is like when you're sitting down against your opponent. Like yes, GSC is not a good army right now, but like you're probably in a lot of trouble if you're bringing a top tier army if you just like don't know how GSC functions. They're very beatable right now. You can outplay all of their nonsense, but you need to be aware of the nonsense. Like you'll just like bleed primary points against them if you don't realize that they're just going to be like appearing on your objectives, even though you're like standing on top of them.
Yep. So, um,
Yeah, chat's saying yeah he's doing a he was going to a tournament the other day, and some guy had 3 monoliths, 20 warriors. Here we go. Yeah, like what does that do? 3 monoliths means that they're going to have uh dynasty codes because a single monolith doesn't have a dynasty code, but 3 can. You could do some kind of weird stuff with that. You can make your monolith obsec. I don't know if this is good, but it's only so bad it can be. It's like a 28 wound, toughness 8, or toughness 7, 2 up armor thing. You're just like, all right, here's this brick, it has obsec, I'm putting it on an objective. Deal with it, I guess.
yeah,
Like,
which means that if you're trying to hold on to some objectives in the middle, you gotta, you can't just have some fast attack or some elites touching it if a monolith can come over and tag it. And that's not even like taking into account that the monolith can physically just prevent you from getting within 3 inches of the objective marker.
and they're good at melee now too. So like a monolith charging onto an objective is a real chance of just like clearing out the 5 intercessors that are standing on it. Because it's 6 attacks, they automatically hit strength 8, AP 3 damage. Your intercessors are just dead. They're gone.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting back to being familiar with things like Gene Stealer cults, look, it's impossible to know everything about every army, which is why when these rosters get unlocked, when these lists get unlocked, you want to take a look at some of the oddball things. Like there's always going to be the meta things, and you're going to know salamanders, like do flamer and melta things, and white scars do assault things, and ultramarines fall back and shoot, and all of that jazz. You know what the top armies are going to do. But somebody brings Gene Stealer cults. I'm not saying go buy the codex and study it, but you should at least have some idea. Review the stratagems, That's the important thing is reviewing the stratagems because the stratagems are like every army's cheat codes that lets them do weird, funky shit. And that's the stuff that's going to catch you by surprise, with them
Mhm.
coming out of nowhere or the custodians charging in your charge phase, those are the things that are going to catch you off guard.
Yeah, for sure.
So, we've talked about, keeping tab on the globe meta and how it can influence the local meta, what you can do to prepare for the actual RTT or GT, by looking at the list, trying to identify the players that are going to be good and you'll probably run into over the course of the tournament, and see if there's any funky stuff going on with their lists. Now let's talk about actually like the day of the tournament. Um,
Mhm.
Benjamin, I know you said earlier, is like, hey, here's the steps to prep for a tournament. Step one, put the army in the car. Step two, go win the tournament. But
That was sarcasm. You weren't supposed to say that out loud.
but it does get a little bit more complicated than that. And I know it's really easy to like most game stores like has like snacks and stuff. And for the most
Yeah.
part it's like high fat, like high carb
Snickers.
Snickers,
Just
chips, that
candy.
kind of stuff. Which, while tasty, isn't great for your tournament performance. Like if you ever taken like a standardized like state test or the SATs or something, like people always tell you like, hey, eat a good breakfast before you go take the test because your brain works better when it has food in you, and that goes well for a tournament too. Like a tournament day is like 8 hours a day, and you're constantly on your feet and thinking, about, all right, what can I do here? What can I do there? Statistically, this is going to happen. I got to say my CP for this. So he's got like X CP left, and I know he can do, Y. It's taxing on your brain. So it's
Yeah, not sorry,
easy
not nothing.
to just eat a bunch of crap that day. And it's easy to, during the lunch break, like go to like the McDonald's down the street and grab a Big Mac. But is it great for your performance? No. Ideally,
No, probably not.
ideally you want to hydrate throughout the day. You want to have some good like high protein snacks. You want to actually eat a breakfast if you can. You don't want to go into like the second round and then be hungry and then just be thinking about lunch the entire time. You know, um, so Benjamin, do you have any experience with trying to stay hydrated and fed during the day? Especially during like a long thing like a Nova.
Like no, yeah, Nova. Well, Nova was easy because there were a bunch of food trucks outside, and their options ranged from nonsense fried chicken to like fruit fruit salad. So it wasn't too hard to like stay hydrated and eat reasonable meals. But I'll always have like if you know the place isn't going to be serving water, like Nova just like had water that gets out, so that was fine. But like when I'm ever going to RTT, like bring a water bottle. Like your brain uh like your brain uses a ton of sugar. That's going to make you dehydrated. Um, make sure that like you're eating a breakfast. You're you actually do want sugar in your breakfast, but you don't want like simple sugars, like anything that's like sweet, because that's just fast release. I teach biology, so I could get a big lecture on this. But you want sugars that are going to release slowly. Um, basically anything that keeps you full for a while. Um, and because you're using your brain uses so much sugar, and you're constantly thinking when you're playing Warhammer, and you will just burn out. Like it's so easy to like crush round one, crush round two, and round three. Like not only is this probably your toughest opponent of the day, but now you're like tired.
You're tired,
And
your
if you,
knees hurt, your feet hurt. Oh, that's another thing. Wear comfortable shoes, and whenever you
Mhm.
can sit.
Yeah, work on the shoes, sit when you can, um, for sure. Um, yeah, I don't find I haven't ever found it particularly challenging to eat breakfast. It's just something I do. I I wouldn't function if I wasn't eating breakfast. So it's not like it's not like a choice. Like, oh,
Yeah,
I'll
I mean,
skip
I
breakfast
know
today. Like,
personally for me, like I gotta personally for me, I gotta make it a point to eat breakfast because I generally don't, and there was a decent chunk of my life where my breakfast was like a can of Monster and a cigarette. So like when you're
yikes.
yeah, when you're going for like a 10-hour day on your feet playing Warhammer, that's probably not gonna fly. You know.
No, I would not function. Um, chat's actually talking about another topic. I think we should get to that one in
Yeah,
a little
yeah, I
bit.
wanted to too. It's a good one.
Yeah. But yeah, as far as like bringing a meal, I don't necessarily bring a meal that often. I usually go out to get food. Where's running us?
Hello.
Um, but yeah, I try not to do. I don't really notice that like eating an unhealthy lunch gets in my head that much. Although I don't try to like eat too much or anything. I oftentimes find myself like eating half my lunch and I'll like, keep half of it for later because overeating can bug my stomach and that combined with nerves is just it's too much.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, you just make sure you eat something and just make sure it isn't like a big bowl of ice cream.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So,
That's fair.
Omar, before we get off this topic real quick, we were just talking about um, game day, like nutrition and hydration when it comes to tournaments. And I know you do a lot of jiu-jitsu tournaments, and I'm pretty sure that there's going to be an overlap or two here. So, just real quick before we move on to the next topic, just what thoughts do you have on the role that hydration and nutrition plays into a tournament day of Warhammer?
It's huge. I mean, and I'd take it a step further and rest. Like, it's a tournament. You want to be on top of your game. You want to be in 100%. And what I usually do is I like to have a nice breakfast. Chris, you and I usually will stop by Dunkin' Donuts or a diner. We'll get eggs. We'll get coffee. We'll make sure. But it's like I try to have something hearty. I'm not doing anything physical, so I can get away with, say, a donut or a pancake. But I'm looking for a proper meal. You're going to be on your feet for a while. You want a mix of fruits, veggies, and your brain does feed off that stuff. Like even if you're not doing anything physical. Uh, Benjamin, you said you got nerves. I don't necessarily get nerves for before a Warhammer tournament because no one's punching me in the face. But before a jiu-jitsu tournament, I need the bathroom more than I care to admit. And that kind of factors in if you do get nervous. Like eat foods that aren't gonna make you like that are gonna hold and take some time to digest. It's a slow burn and it's a long day.
Eat
For
your fiber.
lunch, yeah. For lunch, eat whatever, but like eat. I'm fine with eating a burger or something, but I'll make sure that I've got a salad on the side. Whatever sandwich I have is loaded with veggies because again, it's a long day. I'll usually grab another coffee halfway through because I got to be thinking and I got to be on my feet.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is get enough sleep. I see this all the time at events.
Especially the big ones that people travel to.
Ones that
Yeah.
people travel to. Well, even
Especially
like RTTs, like I don't know, like I'm driving, usually in over an hour to get to any RTT. You want to start your RTTs, 9 o'clock. If you show up at 9 o'clock, that's a little rough. You're usually trying to get there 8:30. Um, so oftentimes it means like getting up at like 6 or 7. And for me, like I mean, I'm like I said, I teach for a living. I'm getting up at like 5 every day if I'm lucky. Um, but I've seen a lot of my friends are used to getting up a little bit later than that, and they'll come into the tournament. They're just like they're dying because they're just not used to getting up that early. They've been up, too long. They maybe skip breakfast because they're not used to eating it breakfast at such a time. And so just be ready to like wake up at the right time to get the event without skipping out on sleep.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean, rest is a huge part of it.
yeah, and if
Yeah,
you go to
no
like
hopping in the
if you go to
house.
LVO, like you're on the strip in Vegas. It's really easy to just not go to sleep. But if you're looking to
Like,
make a
don't do
serious
that.
run at LVO, dude, go to sleep. You don't
Yeah.
you don't gotta hit up the club. You don't gotta be at the craps table all night. You know, if
I
you're
mean,
gonna do that, do
what I
that
will
after
say,
the event.
what I will say is when I'm prepping for a boxing match, the first thing I have to write out in my journal is how much I sleep before I train, before what I'm eating. I have to get at least 9 hours of sleep every night because sleep is 60% of your recovery starts with sleep, 40% is about a bunch of other things. The same applies with your brain, too. We've all gone into work a little underrested, and tasks that are easy become significantly harder.
Yep.
Yes. Speaking of that, well, shall we use that to transition to what chat's trying to talk about?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so Flouty 00 in the chat saying that he's newer to the game. He plays quite a bit, but he notices that he loses games more than the opponent wins. So like he's the one like making mistakes, forgetting his stratagems, overthinking his moves, and he's just getting in his own way rather than keeping a cool head and moving forward on what he knows to do well. And I think that does go into tournament prep. If you're looking to do well at a tournament, you got to know your army for front and back. You can tweak your list as you develop it. You can even just do a wholesale rewrite, but you gotta know what your army can do. And to that end, I think one of the things that helped me a lot is um, going about it heuristically. So, what I mean by heuristically is going through like a mental checklist of, like, all right, this is the end of my movement phase. Do I need to deep strike anything? Do I need to do any stratagems? Do I need to blah 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 blah? And thinking about the rest of my turn. What spells do I know that I need to do? So comes with being familiar with your army, and part of what can make this easier in trying to learn it is go through your codex, go look at the stratagems that you may want, write them down, put it on a piece of paper, write when what phase you're going to use it in, if it's your movement phase, their movement phase, scenarios where you might want to do it. Think about it, write it down, and then just have that piece of paper in front of you while you're playing a game next time. This is another thing that is very helpful is actually the GW data cards. I think are actually like super helpful when it comes to things like that, because before you get to the table, you can look through your deck of data cards and you can pick out the stratagems that you want. And when you've got them in front of you, just lay them on the table in front of you, and you can keep them like right in front of you. Now, granted, this got a little bit more difficult towards the end of 8th edition when like Psychic Awakening added a bunch of stuff and they didn't update the data cards. So I ended up having to like print my own cards by like printing out, like using a Magic the Gathering card maker and then cutting it out and then gluing it to like some lands and putting it into a card sleeve so I could actually like do it. And I also did this for psychic spells, which if you're playing Thousand Suns with like 4 psychers, it gets real difficult to keep track of spells, but this made it a little bit easier. But like I said before, stratagems are your army's cheat codes. They take your army from being a good army to a borderline fucking broken army if your stratagems are good enough.
So the other thing I'd add to that is think about how you play versus how you compete. If you find yourself losing to your opponents in practice game, or if you find yourself losing to yourself in practice games, have your opponents be a little harder on you. When I first started, especially, even though I was playing quite a bit, if I'd miss something, if I'd make a mistake, someone would be like, no, take that back. No, go do that over. And I didn't actually start truly developing as a player until Chris stopped forgiving me. I'd make the mistake, there was no going back, and then he'd point it out and explain it to me, and I'd have to live without consequence. And what that does is it teaches you 2 things. The first is it makes you really internalize the mistake, understand it, and suffer the consequence. The second is it teaches you how to think your way out of a bad spot.
Yeah, I agree. I very rarely allow myself takebacks, even when my opponents are like trying to give them to me during practice games. Like on like very obvious things. We're like, oh man, I was like really supposed to have like remembered that. Just because if I forget it, if I ever remember, oh I lost this game because I forgot this thing. Like I won't forget it again.
Yeah, I forgot to charge Dolman in a game with Chris. Never again. Never happens again. Another thing that I will say is take the pressure off when you play. In the end of the day, this is a game about plastic soldiers killing other plastic soldiers. Have fun with it, enjoy it. And I'm not saying don't go all in with a tournament, but when you're practicing, take some pressure off, have fun with it. Actually take some time to internalize. You can go a little slower. And this is something I tell my jujitsu students. It's not always a competition. If you approach it like it's always a competition, your brain's gonna go crazy. when you show up calm, you can think, you can look, you can analyze. Even when you're enjoying it, you can reflect more clearly. Because if you take a serious mindset, your brain's going to go into overdrive, and there are things you will miss. And the last thing I'll say is building up off of Chris, write out an actual order of operations. I learned this from Age of Sigmar because Age of Sigmar has some weird fucking rules, and it's a lot of holy withins, and like there's a lot of craziness there. And with 40K, if you just write out, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I know I'm going to do before deployment, during deployment, before the game, during my movement, write those out and have a checklist to be like, I cast this, I cast that, I used the stratagem, or I didn't use the stratagem in this round for whatever reason. And that'll actually help you get really organized. Eventually, you won't have to think about it and you'll learn your army, but write it out, like know it. There's no shame in it.
Right, which again goes back to the if your data cards that are available to you are up to date, or if you feel like making your own, they're actually like a great resource. Just because one, you can have the things in front of you, because like the stratagems, like 2/3 of them you're not going to use during the course of the game, and then the remaining third that you are going to use are spread across like, I don't know, like 3 pages or so that you might have to flip back and forth to. And
that might be multiple books,
or it might be multiple books if you're like playing Chaos Soup, which is a fucking nightmare book wise. Which again, like, get the data cards. They're like, I don't know, like $15, and pull out the stratagem cards that you want. If it doesn't have one that you want because it was in like Psychic Awakening or something, just write it on like a playing card or something. Print something out and just slap it on there. Just so you can have that in front of you, and you can organize it by, here are my movement phase ones, these are my psychic, these are my shooting, blah 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 blah. And when you've identified like these are the ones that you're going to be using like 99% of the time, cool. Like, you got it right in front of you. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to think like, oh, am I forgetting a stratagem? No, just look down at the table, look at the cards for your whatever phase it is, and think, all right, this is the start of my shooting phase. Here are the 4 stratagems that I know are going to be of import to me. Do I have a play with any of these stratagems? Do I have the CP for this? And then, if you lay them out next to like your charge and your fight phase cards too, you can think, all right, I have 3 CP. This costs 2 CP to use, but I know I need 2 CP in the charge phase for my, my 3d6 charge. Hey, so it's very helpful in that regard. And over time, as you're doing it, you might not need those cards anymore. You might still want to use them, because I think it's always just easier, especially if it's something that like, it's like, hey, like this is -1 to hit until your next turn. Just leave the card next to the unit so that you don't forget. You don't, cheat yourself out of being -1 to hit.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what you guys said. I actually find the cards to be something that's more useful practicing when getting used to an army. Once you've really mastered an army, if this is something you're bringing to a GT with the goal of making like a run at topping or a run at winning, you should probably be at the point where you don't need to read your stratagems anymore.
You should be, but again, if you're on like day 3 of a GT, and maybe it's LVO, maybe you did go to the craps table, or you went out to Tau nightclub over at the Venetian, maybe your brain's a little bit foggy and you couldn't find that special guy on the strip who's got, some go-go juice.
Oh my God.
You might need those cards.
I mean, so outside of that, it's also, you want to create redundancy.
So the cards are fine to have. I don't bring data cards to anything. I don't like using them. With the exception of I use pieces of paper to mark like if I've used abilities and units or stuff like that. I obviously bring my codex. I oftentimes play with the stratagem page open. If nothing else, because that way my opponent can just like read my stratagems and know what's going on. But I find that usually you should get very comfortable with what your army can do, and a lot of your things should just become like sort of second nature or habit. Getting back to what Chat was talking about with like forgetting things and overthinking stuff. The fewer things you have to actually think about, the easier your game is going to be. So things like I'm going to go back to 8th edition Tau, because 8th edition Tau had a bunch of things because they were on the earlier codexes where you had to do them at certain times, so you just like lost your value. So I oftentimes brought a commander with no guns, and his only job was to make a suit reroll wound rolls. That happens to have the beginning of the shooting phase. And if you like start shooting and then you go back to that, like technically you can't do that. So just like things like getting used to just like always popping that, always, using your Sakea step marker like strategy beginning of the shooting phase, always just being super used to just always moving your shield drones correctly. Just like moving shield drones is just a habit to me at the end of the edition. Like it was just like, all right, like I know exactly how far my shield drones can move. I know exactly how far my riptides can move. I know, where I want to put my shield drones. The turn after this, when my riptide moves up, my shield drones can still be within range of it when they move as well. Because the fewer things you have to think about, as far as like mechanics of your army goes, the more you can think about how you're actually going to play the mission. The more you can think about, how you're going to win the game. You can more you spend time you can spend calculating, victory points. So, like I could like take a movement phase while calculating points at the same time because I just was so used to how my models moved. And at the same time, the less time you spend thinking about base rules, the less energy you're using, which is more energy you'll have for later rounds. So if you're, if you have to think about how every single model moves and what the consequences of where you're putting it every single time you put it down, and not have like, some baseline understanding of like what that's going to look like on the average game on an average board, you're just use way too much mental energy. And by the time you get to round 3, you're going to be completely exhausted mentally. And I think that's one of the really big things of just getting used to an army, really mastering a list, is being able to play it efficiently without wasting all your mental energy for the next round.
Yeah, and that goes back into just heuristics. Like if you can simplify those things and just break it down into patterns of what you're going to do. Like to you, moving shield drones is just you know it like the back of your hand. It's just a pattern that you do now. You don't have to think about, all right, I got to move these guys there so I can get in range of blah. And then, it's like when I first started playing like a possessed bomb. You have to keep track of like, all right, I got to advance these guys and I got to keep them in range so that they can get their buffs. And then I got to like make sure I cast the spell right. The first few times you do it, like you're spending a lot of mental energy thinking about moving that possessed bomb because the movement to that possessed bomb is critical. You fuck it up, your possessed all die. And then you don't have an army anymore because you spent 500 points on it. But after the few games of that, it becomes second nature. All right, I got to move this, I got to move that, I got to move this, and they got to be touching within whatever. So the more practice that you can get and making like simple patterns of the things that you need to do, the more brain cycles you free up for the higher level thinking that you need to do, which is thinking about how you're going to score the primary, thinking about how you're going to score the secondary, not just this turn, but the next 3 turns. If you're just thinking about how you're moving shield drones, you're not going to think about what's happening 3 turns from now. Or you might, but you're not going to do it well.
And this will also help you with time as well. If you're now playing on a chess clock, you should be playing at an efficient pace. Just because that's polite to your opponent, because you shouldn't be taking up more than half the time in the game. And if you have to constantly be checking your rules or constantly like agonizing over your decisions, if you're playing in a tournament, you're literally taking time off of your own clock. Or if you're not playing on a clock, then your opponent is going to be becoming pretty frustrated with you as they just watch your game take 2 turns and then be done. So be aware of how much time you're taking and get used to playing quickly with your army. If you're playing 4 knights, if you want to take 20 minutes every movement phase, you're probably fine. But if you're, playing, spoiler, I want to play 100 Necron Warriors in the near future, I can't be spending, more than 10 seconds on deciding where I'm moving everything because I have to just be physically moving models immediately.
Yeah. But like it all comes down to reps. Like you have to practice with your army. And like I was saying, practice with a training mindset where it's okay to make mistakes. You shouldn't take the games too seriously. It doesn't fucking matter. You lost the game while practicing. There's no stored credit on the line. There's no glory. It's a game, right? Even if it's competitive, even if it's harsh, even if you and your opponent are coming at each other hard, you have to come in with a relaxed mindset. Otherwise, you will hurt yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So
chat asked what our favorite things are to have at a tournament. I think like tools. Is there like a specific brand of measuring tape we like or anything like that?
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on
like that.
So there's a handful of things that I always bring to every tournament and just in general when I play. But first thing is wound trackers. So if you've got just like one type of dice and you're using dice to mark how many wounds are left, and an errant dice rolls over and, well, now does that guy have 1 wound left or 3 wounds left? You don't know. So use like different colored dice with just regular numerals on them for wounds, or I use actual like little wound dials that you can find on like Amazon or Etsy or wherever. But they just like spin down from like 20 to 0, which it's helpful because they're not going to get knocked over by a die and then you're going to forget like how many are left. Another thing that I always bring, aside from the things that you need to play like your minis and your books, is super glue. Always bring super glue. Always bring like a little emergency thing of super glue. I get like Loctite like gel control with like the twist on cap so that it's not like the Zap-A-Gap where it's going to spill everywhere. I just toss it in your bag, and if somebody does something dumb like knock your arm off of a Necron terrain piece onto the ground and break his staff off, Omar, you can have the super glue on hand to just put a dab on there, just push it together, breathe on it a little bit so it dries faster, and then you're good to go. And then you can cry about your chip paint job later.
I say water bottle and snacks. Underrated, but like bring one of those big reusable water bottles and bring snacks, because getting hungry halfway through a round happens, especially on day 2. And it's kind of nice to be able to go, I'm going to have a Cliff Bar.
Yep. Yeah. I agree with the water bottle. As far as like a specific type of measuring tape, I don't have a strong preference towards large or small measuring tapes. I kind of find them all equally useful.
I would say don't cheap out on a measuring tape, because like a decent measuring tape is like $8-9. Just don't buy a dollar store one, because like they just break. They just break.
I guess there's a bar of like there's a minimum bar. I have a really useful like plastic measuring tool that I use a lot. It's got like 9 inches, 6 inches, 2 inches, 1 inch. Which is like all of the common. Oh, and 3 inches, which are like all like it's piling, consolidating, combat range, coherency, deep strike range. So it's like all like the very easy, obvious.
Oh shit, that reminds me. I gotta find my tool like that. Yeah, those tools are great.
Which is great too, because like sometimes the measuring tape, you want something to be exactly 9 inches away. You can like literally put it down on the table, touching the thing you want to be 9 inches from. Put your model on the other side of that thing, touching it. You're like, all right, that's exactly 9 inches. That's nice. And then I always bring the same sort of dice. I have these like large see-through dice with pips on them. They're not huge, but they're a little bit bigger than the normal dice you see. They're super easy to read for both me and my opponent. So I kind of like those. And the last thing is, you couldn't pay me to use dice to track wounds. I detest it. If they get knocked, or you're not sure if they're tracked correctly, or something rolls into them, then you have to remember like what the number was,
or
if two of them next to each other, you're not sure what. I always use a notebook for my wounds. I beginning of the game, or actually more often, when my first units start getting damaged, I just like, hey, these are the names of my units. If I was running Riptides, I named them by the position they had their arms. So it was like up, down, middle, because I had their shield arms were in 3 different positions. And I just keep track of wounds on a notebook, because even if you end up in a discussion with your opponent, like, oh, I thought he had 7 wounds left. No, he's 5. It's like, all right, well, we can like literally just like look at the numbers I wrote down, and like, because I just cross them out when that number's done, and I write the next one down. We just like go through the record and figure out like where we're missing wounds, or like where you think he lost wounds that I didn't. And even then, like, that doesn't come up that often, because again, it's not a die, it's not getting bumped, it's not getting rolled into an attack pool or something by accident. It's just I wrote it down. Like, how many wounds do you have? 10. Didn't get bumped. Like, there it is. It's also specifically for Riptides too. It's also useful for like things like Nova charging. It's like, oh yeah, no, I did do a damage to MC. And then I also oftentimes use that same notebook as well for if I'm bringing a heavy spellcasting army. I'll have a page with every single spellcaster in their own little circle, and with all their spells they know written in that circle. And then when I get to my psychic phase, I'll take out a set of dice and I will start counting up in their circles how many spells have cast that phase, so we can keep track who's cast how many spells.
It's also helpful for armies like
this was
Chaos.
more important in this was more important in 8th when you could like bounce back in between your spells and everything was a nightmare. But even in this edition, it's like good to remember. It's like, have I cast with my 4th sorcerer? I don't remember. And he's like, oh yes, I have. See, there's 2 on him. He's done his 2 spells.
Yeah, writing it down is helpful for an army like Thousand Suns or Chaos, where you can use a stratagem to swap out spells.
Yep. Yeah, so I highly suggest using a notebook in tournaments, and that might just be the Magic player in me, where you just write everything down. But like, I don't know, I find the notebook to be incredible.
Another thing that is nice that I've seen more in Sigmar is you can get these objective markers that are actually circles that have a 3-inch diameter or however big, so you can use them as objective markers. I had a set that I lost, and I need to get another one, but they're phenomenal.
Yeah, the neoprene objective markers are great.
Yeah, there's none of, oh, we're measuring. It's like, nope, I'm on the mat, I'm on the objective. You can see it.
Yep, the only time that gets dicey is when like you're putting an objective like next to a terrain piece. So
yeah, you just let the precept and you put the objective under it.
Yeah. Anything else that you should bring to tournaments? I mean, dice wise, bring a couple different colors of dice, like at least 2. And
don't use the GW dice.
Yeah, and don't for the love of God, do not use dice from Games Workshop because nobody can fucking read them.
Every dice pack that they've made is just ridiculous nonsense. Like all the race specific dice are awful, with the maybe exception of the new Necron ones, which actually have pips on them. Like what a wild concept.
The new Deathwatch ones
have pips on them too.
The new Deathwatch ones are actually good because it's just regular dice, except 1s are skulls and 6s are the Inquisition symbol.
Oh, cool.
Same with the new Space Wolves one.
All right, that's better. Yeah, but like they've announced like the Death Guard and the Squig dice, which are like not even real. It's like they have like rubbery bits in them, and the different size, different ways. They're not random dice. Different sides weigh different amounts, and they're not even. They like don't lay flat.
Omar, what's that one die? Omar, what's that one die you have that I fucking hate?
The orc dice.
Yeah, the orc one, where it's
the Squig dice,
where it's camouflage.
No, it's not a Squig dice. It's an orc dice.
It's an orc die where it's like olive green, and then the 3. And then like the pips on them are like slash marks, and the slash marks are brown.
Oh, those dice are awful.
Yeah,
I've seen those. And then the command dice are probably the worst offender because the 2s and the 5s are completely just the same, and the 1s and the 6s are also just the same. So there's only like 3 sides on them. Yeah, don't use GW dice. They're unbelievably bad. Rant over.
Yeah, Def Taxes and GW making shitty dice. But yeah, bring 2 colors of dice. It's gonna be helpful as like when I was playing like Born Berserkers, what I would do is like instead of just rolling like just the chain axes and then the chain swords, I would just have different colors for both of them and just roll it all at once because it's gonna save time. And then in terms of having your dice set up on the table, what I like to do is I just organize my dice into groups of 5. That way I'm like, all right, I need 15 dice, just grab 3 groups of them, roll it, I'm done. If I need 12, grab 2 groups and then grab 2 more die. You know, just doing something like that is just, it speeds up the game a little bit, especially if you're on a chess clock. And it also just makes it like easier on yourself because when your opponent's moving or doing something, like you're not doing anything, just organize your dice into piles of 5. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Which, Omar, please start doing.
Fine.
Anything else that you would recommend bringing to a tournament besides a way to? Oh, okay. Here's one.
I got a big one. I think you're about to say it.
Mine is an army like a tray to bring your army around on.
Yup.
Because like if you've got like a regular like just foam thing, holy shit, you're gonna spend so much time taking things out of your foam and putting it back in the foam when you're just moving from one table to the other. Nope, just when you get there, unpack your army, put it on your tray, and you can just lift up the tray and go to the next table. Like
Do not re-rack your army every single game. It will take forever if you're putting everything back into foam and taking it out of foam.
yeah,
It's ridiculous. I went to Nova with, oh goodness, 200 models because I was bringing a demon summoning list. I was summoning hordes. And half my opponents put me on a clock, and I stayed under every single one of them. I actually had someone lose against me because they clocked themselves out on a clock that they asked to play on. Like, because I had those I had a, like, it's like one of those, I actually had it, I owned it because I used it to organize stuff in my classroom, but it's like a 3-tier plastic drawers system, and I just put horrors in one, Nurglings in another, Bloodletters in another, Plague Bearers with the Nurglings, and just the demon characters just like sat on top. And I was able to just like take the drawer out, deploy my entire army really quick, put the drawer away, take the next drawer out, deploy my. So like I was able to just deploy everything really quick when I was summoning. I knew what drawer everything was in. And it just made things go really, really fast. And if you're going to play a nonsense horde army, or you're concerned about time, you want to give yourself more time to think, something like that, or even just like a big wide tray if you know you're gonna have more room.
Yeah. So if you magnetize your bases, like if you I have like the Magna racks from Battle Foam. So like all of my guys have the magnets on the bases and they can just stick on there. So that's not as time consuming as re-racking your army into foam, but still, like, what you can do is if you've got the magnets in there, just bring like a baking sheet. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. Bring a baking sheet, just stick them right on there, and now you just move your army from table to table really easy without, unzipping your army bag and putting in a. Or if you don't have magnets or you don't care about that, and you got an IKEA near you, you can get a tray from IKEA that's like, I don't know, like this big. This means nothing to the camera right now, but it's big enough. But it's like $10, and I have one of them. I spray painted it. I made it into like a display board. And I can use that very easily to carry around. Omar, I think I let you borrow it at Captain Con.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you let me borrow it at Captain Con and my life changed. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also say consider movement trays. Yeah, sometimes your guys aren't going to be exactly where you want them to be because the movement trays aren't, super together or super spread out. But even just like the GW ones are pretty good. I used them at Captain Con because I was running a maximum MSU army with the old version of Master Artisan, so I knew I was going to need as much time as possible to reroll all my dice. So all my 5-man intercessor squads were on movement trays because I didn't need them to be doing like weird tactical things. I needed them to just be moving around as a general group. And sometimes I took them off the trays sometimes in movement phases where I needed them to do something weird, but like for the most part, I just deployed them on trays and kept them on trays. It made deployment really fast. It made movement phases go really fast. Especially if you're playing a horde, I need to pick up more movement trays for Necron Warrior reasons. But yeah, definitely consider using those. They make your life a lot easier.
Yeah, when I was running a lot of chaos cultists, movement trays were a total game changer. I had a friend with a 3D printer, so I just had him 3D print some 25 millimeter movement trays. And instead of moving like 80 cultists by hand, no, you just pick up like a rack of like 5 or 10 of them, just move the whole thing at once. Derek Bohr in the chat, to further go into the magnet thing, I know Battle Foam has a new Magna rack thing where the racks actually like slide out and then slide back in, which I want to get, but I can't justify paying for it, especially when I'm not moving my army anywhere right now. But that's another option that you could do if you didn't want to just like use like a baking sheet, because then you can easily just re-rack your army into the case because the trays just slide out. There's also if you don't want a tray, I know like on Amazon there's like this folding like cart thing that you can get, which you can put like your army on it, and you put your dice and your books on a thing, you put your snacks and your drinks in your army bag like on the bottom tray, and then you just move around from table to table. And not every tournament is going to have like a side table for you to put your stuff on. There might be like a chair, but otherwise it's going to have to go like under the table. Let's see. So yeah, army trays, they're great. if you don't want to go to IKEA or if you don't have one near you and you don't have magnetized bases, um, go to like a craft store or something and get like a big like poster like frame thing
Mhm.
with like the backing on it. So I got one of those, and I use like because I had the magnetized bases, I use like some tin to line the bottom of it so I can have it stick to it. But those things work great too, even if you don't do that. And again, you can make it into like a display board for dudes. You know.
All right.
Let's see.
That's everything I had.
Yeah, I think that's everything I had too. I think we covered a lot of good material tonight. Um, so before we sign off, any closing thoughts from either of you guys?
No,
No.
I think that's everything.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been episode 19, Prepping for Tournaments. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd like to thank our contributors for this episode, Benjamin Rubenstein and Omar Q. This has been the 3D6 Charge podcast. Again, we're live on Twitch every Wednesday night, 7:30 p.m. Eastern, Twitch TV 3D6 Charge. Bye for now, and don't roll any ones.